Victory looked like a matter of weeks, another blitzkrieg, and morale at home revived. Göring inspected what was now the German colony of Ukraine, intended to be a serf region of agriculture. Nazi experts on the Slavs hoped that this simple folk with simple customs would enjoy this prospect. 6 months later, in the blinding snow before Moscow, the Germans were stopped. They lacked winter clothing, and the government appealed for furs and warm coats.
An den letzten Tagen der Sammlung drängen sich vor den Annahmestellen die Gebefreudigen, um ihre Spenden abzuliefern.
Na, Volksgenosse, tut Ihnen das nicht leid? So ein schönes Feld, oh, ist das warm da drin.
No amount of rehearsed enthusiasm could conceal that this was the Reich's first military reverse. The Minister of Munitions and head of the war effort, Fritz Todt, flew to inspect the construction work on the Eastern Front. One of the men who should have been on the plane was Hitler's court architect, the producer of the Nuremberg rallies, Albert Speer.
I heard in the headquarters that Todt's plane crashed. He was dead, and half an hour afterwards I was asked to come to Hitler. And to my great surprise, he told me, you shall be his successor in all his offices.
Todt got the funeral of a National Socialist hero. By now, nearly 250,000 Germans had been killed on the battlefronts, but Todt was the first of Hitler's close comrades to meet death in the war. Hitler was shaken. The war had reached him personally. Speer had already seen the chaotic, disconnected way that Nazi war industry worked. Transport, munitions, all had to be brought under a single control. One of its first targets was the labor supply. Nazi Germany had never mobilized its full workforce.
Tried to get the women in the war production machinery, but it was opposed by Saugel, who was in charge of all the labor. The thing came to Göring, and Göring flatly denied too. Then it came to the decision of Hitler, and Hitler also said, no, the women must be preserved. They have other tasks. They are for the family. They have to bear children, and it would spoil their health and their morale if they are working in the factories.
But Ukrainian women were being imported as maids, foreign conscripts for slave labor. Under Speer, a great irony was fulfilled, for Germany was becoming exactly what the Nazis said it would not become. They had promised to return to the land, an end to great capitalism. Instead, the armaments drive was strengthening the vast industrial monopolies and swelling the cities with German and foreign labor. 2.5 years, Speer multiplied armament production nearly 4 times. 80% of industry came under his control. He brushed aside bureaucracies and worked through his own experts.
He had ideas, and he put all his energy behind these ideas and put them through with very much success. He didn't know how things had been done in the past because he hadn't anything to do with it. So he didn't know what was impossible and was possible, and he succeeded sometimes in doing that impossible too.
It is astounding for everybody who didn't live in our authoritarian system to hear that it was difficult to get through with orders, but it was difficult because Germany was divided in many districts, in 32 districts, and at the head of every district was a Gau leader. He was a strong political man and had the absolute power in his district. He was only subordinated to Hitler himself. So when my orders didn't please one of the Gau leaders, possibly they weren't carried out.
Tank production showed how even Speer failed to get all of his way. He could not slice through the competing hierarchies which were Hitler's chosen style of government. There were too many types of tanks, too few tanks in all, too many calibers of gun, and different sizes of ammunition.
Hitler thought he's far superior to such problems, and what for others would have been discussions of weeks and weeks, for him was a decision of just a fraction of a minute. Of course, there was a change too. One can never say that a man is always the same person, and Hitler changed a lot from 42 to 43. In 43, he was more and more convinced that he doesn't need no more the advice of anybody, and he made the decisions by himself without listening.
Hitler spent more and more time at the Wolf's Lair, his melancholy remote encampment at Rustenburg in the East Prussian forest. Those around him were obsequious. The better advisors lost touch. Hitler's personal SS adjutant was Richard Schulze-Kossens.
Nearly all ministers were stationed at Berlin, and some of them had contact officers in the headquarters. Only Ribbentrop, Himmler, and sometimes Göring had their own headquarters not so far from our headquarters. Speer was very often in the headquarters because his ministry was very important for the war. Only Bormann was always in the headquarters. There was the only direct contact to Hitler.
Bormann, as his secretary, was the most powerful man, more powerful, I think, than Hitler, because when the power was divided, all those men who were in power had to go via him to Hitler, except me. I had the direct access to Hitler.
There wasn't much cooperation. The cooperation was in the lower levels of the smaller technocrats. We didn't have anything like a cabinet. Ministers met, if at all, very seldom, and didn't talk about very important matters, so was my impression. Every ministry worked for itself, and sometimes they got orders from Hitler, but very, very seldom.
Foreign visitors like Mannerheim, the Finnish leader, could see that Hitler was living in a world of illusion. He still trusted the reassurances of Göring, head of the Luftwaffe. Göring, a few months later, claimed that his aircraft could supply the Eastern Front, even when a whole army was cut off at Stalingrad.
Achtung, ich rufe noch einmal Stalingrad.
Hier ist Stalingrad. Hier ist die Front an der Wolga.
Achtung, die U-Boot-Fahrer im Atlantik.
Christmas 1942.
Seebootsstützpunkt am Atlantik.
Achtung, Catania. Hier ist die Mittelmeerfront und Afrika.
The men at Stalingrad had come through on the radio link-up loud and clear. But the brave words were faked in a Berlin studio. For the last time, the cathedral stood undamaged as the Christmas fair took place in Berlin. But Stalingrad was still cut off, and deep down the nation sensed what was to happen.
3. Februar. Das Oberkommando der Wehrmacht gibt bekannt. Der Kampf um Stalingrad ist zu Ende.
The Battle of Stalingrad has come to an end. For once the radio spoke the truth, and with some dignity. 91,000 survivors surrendered. Only a few thousand ever saw Germany again.
I was not long in the headquarters, but I felt very significant the atmosphere on this day. All people were depressed, and Hitler himself was very serious, and he stared on his soup without saying any word, and he was very depressed.
The world realized, and the Germans realized, that this was the turning point. This was a tragedy which could not be hidden. And Stalingrad did not come alone. A week before the city fell, the Germans learned that the Allies would demand unconditional surrender. There was then to be no mercy for the Germans. Nazi and non-Nazi both lost some illusions and drew a little closer together. The escape hatches had been bolted. This was to be a total war, fought to the finish.
The general feeling was, well, we can do nothing. It doesn't matter what we do. We'd better stick it out. Ausharren was the word, I remember, on everyone's lips. There's no alternative. We've got to fight to the bitter end. And this Goebbels used to the uttermost in his propaganda.
Goering inspected what was now the German colony of Ukraine, intended to be a serf region of agriculture. Nazi experts on the Slavs hoped that this simple folk with simple customs would enjoy this process. Victory looked like a matter of weeks, another blitzkrieg. The morale at home revived. And warm coats.
An den letzten Tagen der Sammlung drängen sich vor den Annahmestellen die Gebefreudigen, um ihre Spenden abzuliefern.
Na, Volksgenosse, tut Ihnen das nicht leid? So einen schönen Feld, oh, ist das warm da drin.
No amount of rehearsed enthusiasm could conceal that this was the Reich's first military reverse. The Minister of Munitions and head of the war effort, Fritz Todt. 6 months later, in the blinding snow before Moscow, the Germans were stopped. They lacked winter clothing, and the government appealed for fur.